Fun times in Cleveland again.
Still Cleveland.
Come on down to Cleveland town, everyone. Under construction since 1868. See our river that catches on fire. It's so polluted that all our fish have AIDS. We see the sun almost 3 times a year. This guy has at least 2 DUIs. The flats look like a Scooby-Doo ghost town. Don't slow down in East Cleveland or you'll die.
Alright, give the folks a little bit of time to get seated. A little bit of time to figure out why they're here. You know why we're here. Colossalcon decided, you know what? 3 o'clock, Saturday, you know what people want? Obscure history.
And pedantic ramblings.
And I guarantee you folks, there is no group better at pedantic rambling than Justin and Mike of Maison Otaku.
Prepare for some pulse-pounding edutainment.
Alright. Oh my. There's literally dozens of you out there. See, I'm used to a crowd of 5s, or 5 singular.
Or ones plus friends.
Yeah.
Neat.
So, this is a bit unusual. This actually startles me a little bit. This even has me convinced you might have some expectations. I will try to rise to the occasion. I make no guarantees. You chose it. Alright. Oh my, they're still flying in.
That's good for us.
Yeah. It's fantastic. It's amazing. You'll also notice, I'm going to be squinting at you a lot. See these lights? I've never dealt with anything like this before. See these glasses? Normally they're what make me able to see you folks. See these lights? Make them useless.
So before we get started, quick show of hands. Who here's a Cleveland native?
Woo!
Represent.
Fantastic. And you see, that's part of why this panel happened. I grew up in Old Brooklyn. So did Mike.
Currently a Parmenian.
As of late, a Lorraine. But
I'd rather not say. Wait, hey, if you see me out in public, please leave me alone.
oddly enough, used to live on Merkel, off of West 54th. Not anymore. Okay, they still... Really? Oh, this must be a boring Saturday. Thank you. No. This is exciting. This is interesting. I promise you. I am going to make up for all of those mistake by the lake comments.
Justin, we're just going to reinforce them.
Possibly. All right.
You be the judge.
I'd say now. Should I start it now?
Yeah!
Should I start it now?
Yeah!
Well, welcome to Anime. It's Cleveland's fault. And it really is. Here's a little fun tidbit. Right now, the global anime market is estimated at $22 billion. Crunchyroll, the streaming site, was bought out by Sony for $1.2. Viz, the manga publisher, represents 60% of all comic books sold on American shelves. In fact, here was a startling thing for me just this past week while I was picking up snacks before the convention. Walmart sells manga. Fantastic. Target also sells Gunpla. They compete with My Hobby Shop and Illyria. We at Maison Otaku do not condone any acts of violence against major retailers, but we find it funny. Next slide. So anime's big business. Huge business. But how did we get here? How do we get to the point of billions of dollars of sales in America for Japanese comics and cartoons? Isn't that kind of weird? If we really break it down, because, I mean, Japan's not the only one making cartoons. There's Russian cartoons, there's French cartoons, there's German cartoons, there's English cartoons, there's Australian cartoons, which my children love. Why anime? Well, stick with me. I know. You're going to think I'm a little touched in the head. I am.
Yeah.
Hands up for neurodivergence. It's because of Cleveland, folks. Cleveland is why anime is so big. Cleveland. Land of the Cleves. And it all starts with polka.
Now see, diversity is a big deal here, and in this picture you can see every single kind of 50-year-old white man.
And strangely enough, this isn't a joke.
Yeah.
If you stick with me, folks, this isn't a joke. This is kind of how we got here. So, 50s and 60s, polka was actually big pop music. So much so that there was nationally syndicated polka hours on television. Some of your great-grandparents probably watched the Lawrence Welk Show. Mine did. Proudly. Oddly enough, actually, as sort of a sidebar, interesting sidebar, that is why Cleveland broadcast history is also near and dear to my heart. My great-great-uncle, Ron Penfound, was better known to the Cleveland area as the children's entertainer Captain Penny, who hosted a show that showed cartoons and Little Rascals shorts on WEWS in the 1950s and 60s. So that's a little personal aside to me of this era of television and why it catches my interest. Now, our story begins with this artist. This is the Singing Nun. She was a platinum seller in the 60s and into the 70s. And she was a platinum record seller for a Cleveland record label. Cleveland International Records. What's this got to do? I'll get there. So, Cleveland International Records is laser focused on polka. Polka is their thing. After all, they're Clevelanders. But Steve Popovich, Sr. of Cleveland International Records, is a little tentative about this. He thinks that the polka boom is going to die out, and maybe this rock and roll thing has something to do with it. Maybe this rock and roll thing is a smart thing to do. So he gets desperate for a rock act to sign to his label so he can diversify. Now, it was 1973. Oh, happy Pride Month. The year is 1973, and this is one of the biggest musicals in the world. I know I'm using an image from the film, but we're talking about the original Rocky Horror Show, which was the West End musical stage show in 1973. Why is this important? Well, aside from being a huge hit and being a phenomenal success and being a monumental touchstone that is still shown every midnight, 4 times a month in Cleveland, you could still attend a classic midnight showing of Rocky Horror in Cleveland, which is one of the fantastic things out there. One of the cast members of this particular show, a man by the name of Marvin Lee Aday, was part of the cast, and he also was starring in another off-Broadway show. This one, This is More Than You Deserve. It is a political satire about the return of injured Vietnam vets to America. There in the center, you see Marvin Lee Aday. He's the one with the two nurses flanking him. This show bombed terribly. It had a 2-week off-Broadway run, which was absolutely lambasted, except for Marvin Lee Aday's performance. And it was noted that the lyrics that Marvin Lee Aday was singing were actually quite creative. So, Aday and his lyricist, who was also a piano player, teamed up to make a rock album. Aday began performing under his childhood nickname, Meat, better known to all of us as Meatloaf. Cleveland International Records took the chance on 2 Broadway washouts to create this album, Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell.
An album which it bears mentioning is basically 2 people we're about to talk about taking the songs from a musical they never got to make and just like, well, screw it, we'll just make an album.
Yes. One of my favorite jokes about Bat Out of Hell is that with good enough cover art, you can make anyone listen to nerd musicals. And it really is. It's all about car crashes and young love by the side of the lake, and everything is blown up to wildly dramatic proportions.
And that cool part where they make a guitar sound like a motorcycle engine.
Yes. And it's all the brainchild of this man. Would you believe this is a dork? This is Jim Steinman.
He is very important for what we are talking about here.
He is very important for what we're talking about. Jim Steinman is the lyricist and piano player, effectively the entire creative driving force behind Bat Out of Hell. Between his music and Meatloaf's performances, it became a bigger seller in 1977 than Pink Floyd's Animals album. 2 Joker Broadway washouts from in a studio in Cleveland beat out Pink Floyd, beat out Black Sabbath, beat out Queen. Queen's album at this time was News of the World. It didn't do as well as Bat Out of Hell.
Nice.
And I promise you, this actually does reflect back on anime. So, simultaneously, Cleveland has a very, very long comics history. In fact, you know who the world's most famous Clevelander is?
Superman!
Exactly, Superman. The Man of Steel is a Clevelander.
Yep.
Doesn't that make sense? Steel? Cleveland? This is not Superman.
Clearly.
This is R. Crumb. If you're a child in the audience, don't read R. Crumb. I'm very sorry if anyone under the age of 18 goes away from this panel under the impression that they should read R. Crumb. That's my fault. That's me being a bad influence. However, if you're over the age of 18, go find some R. Crumb and get offended, because R. Crumb was great at that. He was part of the underground comics movement. The underground comics movement was basically all the hippie leftovers who weren't interested in making superhero comics, who weren't interested in playing ball with Archie or anything like that. They wanted to satirize politics. They wanted to make fun of cultural norms. They wanted to tell stories about real life. They wanted to tell stories about weird things. This man made most of his comics about getting piggyback rides from his extraordinarily tall wife. His extraordinarily tall wife, Aline Kaminsky, made a humongous series of comics about second wave feminism and her role in it. She was actually a huge pioneer in the art form, and sadly we lost her last year. And Crumb, while not a native Clevelander, lived in Cleveland for most of his 70s creative output. So you could actually walk into bookstores and coffee shops in Cleveland in the mid-70s and encounter guys like Crumb Harvey Pekar, Harlan Ellison, who is a famously grumpy science fiction author from Cleveland, by the way. How Cleveland a Phrase is the title of his most famous book. I have no mouth, yet I must scream. So, all of these underground comics, all of this, they started selling. And what happens when something's selling? People want to sell more of it. National Lampoon was the second place satirical humor comedy magazine in the United States. Second to Mad Magazine. But they were on a roll in the 70s. Huge roll. After all, I mean, covers like this sell copies. And they were grabbing these underground comic artists from left and right. No, come here. Do a couple of strips for us. Come here. Write something lewd and nasty for us. Come on, let's sell some print. National Lampoon wanted to expand. They wanted to break into more comic market. And they had an idea. Why should we make comics? There's other comics out there. There's comics in France.
And for those of you familiar with early anime distribution in America, this should sound very familiar.
Yeah. This was a French comics anthology that specialized in fantasy and science fiction comics called Metal Hurlant. Metal Hurlant became, when translated into English, it became Heavy Metal Magazine. This is the first issue in April of 1977. This is our precedent for translating comics and bringing them over and publishing them rather than generating them themselves. And it was a success. And by the way, if you get a chance, pick up an issue. It doesn't all make sense, and some of it's kind of dated, and some of it's bizarre, but it's a lot of fun. I mean, it is a lot of fun to read a heavy metal magazine. Now, this was one of the first hit series inside of Heavy Metal Magazine. This is the Neverwhere series featuring the character Den by Richard Corbin. The basic premise is a teenage boy who is a scrawny dork gets transported to the world of Neverwhere, and his mind goes into this brawny bodybuilder body, and he goes out to fight monsters and save princesses and all that. So it's an isekai. Mm-hmm. A legit isekai in the 70s, made by an American artist. Nice. An American artist who also did this artwork. Jim Steinman, a humongous comic book nerd, reached out to Richard Corbin when they were creating Bat Out of Hell, and this artwork is Corbin's. When we lost Corbin in, I want to say 2018, Steinman actually eulogized him. And if you want a really heartbreaking message of one artist to another, find the written eulogy that Steinman did for Richard Corbin. It's every person on earth would love to be remembered like that. Now, this film, I was expecting that. This film was National Lampoon's push into movies. I mean, we're doing really well with this comic thing, we're doing really well with this magazine thing. We should do movies too. And it got them even more money. And hey, if we're succeeding with this and we're succeeding with that, well, let's keep going. Now, here, we're even going to show, this is a fun one. See this picture? So there on the left, that is John Belushi, star of Animal House. There in the center, our beloved Meatloaf. There on the center right That is Steve Popovich Sr. of Cleveland International Records. That is how closely tied in National Lampoon and CIR were. They were very closely tied. Now here's where things start funneling in. Are there folks out there who are familiar with this manga?
Yep.
We will correct that now.
Okay. So, that's understandable. This manga debuted in 1973. It's one of the most historically important manga out there because this was actually an autobiographical manga by a survivor of the Hiroshima bombing. A bit of a downer in the midst of a quasi-comedy panel, I know, but stick with me. I bring it up at this point because since we've already had success with importing French comics, somebody had the idea, well, let's have some success with importing Japanese comics. And so the very first manga sold in the States, imported and translated, was actually Barefoot Gen in 1982, translated as I Saw It, and distributed by Edu Comics. This was actually printed as classroom resource material originally. So the very first manga release was sent for free to schools. That's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Manga's big break in the United States was in the classroom. Around the same time, National Lampoon funnels a whole bunch of money to Canada for the purposes of animating their hit comics anthology, Heavy Metal. And this isn't really a wild hair for them either. Through the 70s, there have been a few small-scale releases of adult-oriented animation. I mean, Disney was in the toilet at the time. I love a lot of the 70s Disney output, the late 60s, 70s Disney output. Like, I'm a huge fan of The Rescuers. Oh, thank you. That's good to hear. There's probably a few more of you out there. Black Cauldron people. There we go. Okay, so we know the period, but we also know that the sales weren't great.
Forgetting Robin Hood, how dare you?
I forget a lot of things. I'm allowed. Creative license. So, around the same time, artists like Ralph Bakshi did his version of The Hobbit and his version of Lord of the Rings. You had Bakshi actually doing an X-rated film adaptation of R. Crumb's Fritz the Cat character. Interesting fact, Crumb hates Bakshi's Fritz the Cat. Not because it's X-rated, but because Crumb thinks it's X-rated for the wrong reasons. Crumb doesn't think it was offensive enough and thought it was too sexualized. Either way, it's a weird film, but it exists. And it's important to note it exists for our purposes. Because it establishes adult animation cinema is happening. Now, we had anime in the United States prior to the 80s. This is important to note. Speed Racer was on television in the 1960s. Star Blazers was on television in the 1970s. But they were heavily altered from their original form. There was no attempt at tangibly connecting them with their point of origin. There was no decisive, no, this is a different thing. This isn't just a Saturday morning cartoon. This isn't just an afternoon cartoon. This is anime. We're getting there. And a lot of it's thanks to this guy. Anyone out there know who this guy is?
He's the reason we're here.
This gentleman is Carl Masick. Okay, now that some folks know his name, know him by name. Masick is responsible for taking Macross, Mosquito, and Southern Cross, stitching them together with some Scotch tape, slapping a dub on it, and calling it Robotech. 1985, hit syndication, huge fan base. A huge wave of people excited about this strange science fiction cartoon with these transforming robots and this love triangle and a lead character who dies. A lead character who has an interracial girlfriend who dies. Weirdly progressive stuff in this cartoon. People are going, oh my. But it's still, the lead pilot is Hikaru, but he's not. Yeah, Rick Hunter. So, but we're going to figure out, so how do we get from deleting everything about Japan from the Transforming Robot Show to Christmas 1989, when Akira is in theaters, when Carl Masik's company, Streamline Pictures, puts Akira in theaters, via cooperation with Orion Pictures, the creators of RoboCop. RoboCop is equally responsible for anime.
By extension, Paul Verhoeven.
So, here's how we get there. And I love this part. I truly love this part. I love this film. I actually love just about every cut of this film. This film is one of the sci-fi greats. This film is one of those science fiction movies that everyone's supposed to see because it's one of the best science fiction movies, and if you love science fiction movies, this is the science fiction movie you want. And I loved it in Japan. They also loved Streets of Fire,
which bears mentioning kind of bombed here.
Streets of Fire did bad in the United States. Streets of Fire lost millions.
But in Japan became a cultural touchstone, and that's not an exaggeration.
Streets of Fire was an amazing film that, in concept, a man with no name arrives in a town riddled with gangster bikers and armed with a shotgun and a really good jawline, sets to work righting wrongs and saving the girl. Yes, it's a spaghetti western set in an alternate future that's also kind of 1950s.
Yeah, it's basically combine the Hollywood version of the 50s with the contemporary Hollywood version of the 80s. It's pretty awesome.
Yes. Everything about this film works on rule of cool. Why does it look that way? It's cool. Why does it sound that way? It's cool. Why does everyone ride around in custom 50s cars and wear biker jackets? It's cool.
Who would actually ask that?
People who were the reason Streets of Fire didn't make any money in America.
Fair.
And there were two big things that came away from Streets of Fire that everybody loved. First, Willem Dafoe. Everyone's favorite crazy guy, the Green Goblin himself, got his film start playing the Flock of Seagulls hair greaser biker gang leader in Streets of Fire, whose climactic moment in the movie is a sledgehammer duel with the lead character. It is awesome. Also, the movie had an awesome soundtrack.
Yes.
Delivered mostly by the fake band Helen Reddy. See this whole view, see this color scheme?
Yeah.
The color scheme we know is the 1980s. It starts in this sequence. It all starts here visually. And this visual was so amazing that this kind of happens. This happens. This is Priss. Now, those of you who know your Blade Runner are probably going, wait, but Priss. Yes, Priss of the band, Priss and the Replicants from Bubblegum Crisis, the anime, were wholly inspired by Blade Runner and Streets of Fire.
In fact, one of the creators flat out went on record as saying the show started because he said, and I quote, "I want to make a sci-fi version of Streets of Fire."
Yes, it was absolutely where it started. The show is Bubblegum Crisis from 1987. A fantastic combination of music and visuals and beautiful women fighting robots in power armor. I hope that grabs your attention.
Yeah, if that doesn't interest you, I can't help you.
And it was actually a hit for the small studio Artmic. Artmic's a lot of fun, by the way, folks. Artmic did a whole bunch of obscure OAVs, well, obscure and not so obscure OAVs, in the 80s and up to the 90s, films, lots of fun stuff like that. The neat thing about them is they don't exist anymore.
And we kind of have the Yakuza to thank for that.
Yeah.
That's not a joke.
It is not a joke. The main financier behind Artmic got involved in some really weird real estate deals that lost Artmic all their money, and then he just vanished. And the official word is, he left. We don't know. No one knows.
He's totally not laying in the bottom of Tokyo Bay.
Yeah. So, Artmic had created a whole bunch of these OAVs, a whole bunch of these shows, all this stuff, and they're seeing, hey, you Americans, you're buying this stuff. You bought Star Blazers, you bought Macros. They made a bundle. They bundle. Hey, one sale price. We'll sell you the distribution rights to the whole lot of it. We don't even care what you do with it. Just, you give us some money, and you can sell our stuff in America. They actually went to America, toured the comic convention circuit, hoping to find some nutcase fans with enough cash to do this deal. And they did. They did. They found Richard Woodhead of Animego. How many folks out there are familiar with this logo? Dang.
We'll fix that too.
We're gonna have to fix it. Because this is an important logo, folks. You see, this logo, first off, these folks have, here's a fun story about how dedicated an anime fan Richard Woodhead is. Are there any of you out there that know the movie Project A-ko? Okay, some. It's about Superman and Wonder Woman's daughter and how she can never get to school on time.
Which I think DC actually now recognizes as their canonical daughter in one of the Infinite Earths.
Yes. It's, even off of that limited description, it's so worth seeing. It was actually the first thing I saw.
Which is hilarious because the whole point of that movie is to lampoon stuff that neither of us had seen yet at the time. And now that we've seen a bunch, we're like, oh, that's what that joke is.
That is really part of the fun. So, discotheque. I'm hoping more of you know discotheque. Yeah. Okay, good. So discotheque very recently set about restoring Project A-ko, which is, hats off to you, gentlemen. Thank you. That film transfer was garbage. Seriously, I have one of the Central Park Media Project Echo box releases. Oy. Anyway, so they set about restoring it. They could not find the original 8mm print, which is bad for art restoration. So they started investing in AI software to clean it up. They started evaluating using different software, different hardware. They're going through all these different processes of we're just going to have to clean it up frame by frame. We're tracking down archival Laserdisc copies, beta copies to try and get as close as we can to the original. Well, one of their representatives was visiting a print film warehouse in Japan, working on another project. Woodhead happened to be there because he was closing the deal on the Megazone 23 reissue. He asked them, hey, how's that Project Echo reprint doing? And they said, lousy, we can't find the original 8mm. Woodhead turns to the clerk, trades a few lines with him to find out that print's supposed to be in this warehouse. Clerk tells him where it's supposed to be. Woodhead then turns to the discotheque guy and says, oh, this happens all the time. Come with me. Woodhead leads the guy into the warehouse, goes to the shelf where Project Echo is supposed to be in their archival system. It says, now see, this is where it's supposed to be, but this happens all the time. So if we go down 3 shelves, and he takes the print off the shelf and says, here you go. Save the whole project with the original master. Because he knows sometimes they just put stuff on the wrong shelf. They don't keep very close track of this stuff.
Organize your collections, folks.
Organize your collections, folks. So, bringing it back to this. Woodhead sees this great deal. Sees this great deal for all of these OAVs. He's like, I could be the guy. I could bring this art form that I love to the United States. Yes, I will sacrifice every dime I have to do this. This is the very first home release of anime in the United States. Every Blu-ray, every DVD, every streaming copy, every dub, every sub, everything that follows this blue tape of Metal Skin Panic Maddox 01.
Sidebar, we have any OG anime fans in here who remember the blue tapes with the thin slits? Anyone? Awesome.
This is the start of our entire industry. A company inspired by an obscure, weird American film bundles a bunch of cheap shows together and foists them off on a broke college student. And what ties all this back? How do we tie all this back? Well, Bubblegum Crisis, if you remember that Streets of Fire? Remember how much everyone loved the music and visuals of Streets of Fire? Well, Streets of Fire had that wonderful soundtrack of amazing songs, written, scored by Jim Steinman. Jim Steinman's music was the secret to Streets of Fire. Streets of Fire is the secret to Bubblegum Crisis. Bubblegum Crisis is the secret to Artmic. Artmic is the secret to Animego, and Animego unlocks anime to the West. Gives us all of it, and none of it would have happened if it hadn't been for Cleveland!
We're not Detroit!
None of this happens If a strange Clevelander doesn't decide maybe polka isn't quite as popular as we think. Isn't that a wonky set of circumstances? Doesn't that make you sit up a little taller in your seat? To say, no, you know what? Cleveland's given the world something great. Cleveland gave us anime. Mm-hmm. And I think we should be grateful to that. Of course, this could all just be coincidence. What do you folks think? Coincidence or Cleveland?
Cleveland!
Now, strangely enough, this did not take nearly as long as I thought it would.
I think we got some time. So Q&A, briefly.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Do y'all have, like, we've got a friend that is big into the history of anime.
Well, here.
Well, actually,
I'll do this way.
Basically, can we get a copy of this information?
this not so much, but unfortunately I don't have any business cards. We are Maison Otaku. We have a YouTube channel. Full disclosure, we're on a bit of an extended hiatus, but we have 100+ videos that are, and each episode is basically its own panel.
Okay.
So just go to YouTube and search Maison Otaku.
Okay.
Is at least your
Sure.
slideshow something you can share so we can give to him and be like, here's the slides, Google it?
I will see what I can do. However, it's worth noting, we didn't do it for this one because of some stuff, but a lot of our previous panels we have recorded and uploaded so you can see other panels, but we'll see what we can do about getting you some of this info.
Okay, awesome. I have a microphone and I don't know how to use it, but thank you.
No problem.
All right. So, someone next. Someone next. Right over there. Okay.
Why are we not Detroit? And our question, if I'm not Detroit, can we cook and eat their sequels for dinner?
Well, okay. So, as to why we're not Detroit, strangely enough, we had better auto manufacturers in the 20s. Seriously, Peerless was a Cleveland-based auto manufacturer. So was Winton, and so was Baker Electric. So there we go. We got that over the Motor City.
Yeah.
As far as cooking and eating seagulls, look,
I wouldn't
folks,
recommend it.
Everything's good with a bit of Worcester. Okay. Next.
It does make a good base.
Who's someone else? Have some fun with this, folks. Okay, right over here. How do you spell our tag? M-A-I-S-O-N space O-T-A-Q-U.
AKU.
AKU, sorry. It's a play on the Rumiko Takahashi show Maison Ikoku.
We even use the Maison Ikoku font, so if you're familiar with that series, that's an easy way to find us.
Okay.
Mason.
Maison Otaku. M-A-I-S-O-N space O-T-A-K-U. All right. Next. Anyone else? I am blind, so please have your hand up. Oh, another. Well, okay, so how I came up with this, I love all these things.
His brain works very weirdly.
Yes, these are all things that I love greatly, and just because I watch all of them, I sort of just started drawing lines mentally, and it just became kind of a fun thing for me. Okay.
Come on down to Cleveland town, everyone. Under construction since 1868. See our river that catches on fire. It's so polluted that all our fish have AIDS. We see the sun almost 3 times a year. This guy has at least 2 DUIs. The flats look like a Scooby-Doo ghost town. Don't slow down in East Cleveland or you'll die. Our economy's based on LeBron James. buy a house for the price of a VCR. Our main export is crippling depression. We're so retarded that we think this is art. It could be worse though, at least we're not Detroit. We're not Detroit.